we expect that there would be about 12% of the population are people with disabilities. At the time that you have that injury, you are disabled and the disability impairs you in terms of being able to do your daily work itself. This is not even including what in 2022, 10% of India's population is supposed to be now senior citizens. You would see that they are always limited in terms of what they can do, cannot do, right? It could be hearing impairment, it could be physical disabilities, it could be visual disabilities. Children are not exposed to other people with disabilities. So unless there is somebody in the family, you have little or no idea what disabilities are, right? In your growing up years itself. So you have little or no empathy. One of the key things was that people did not know if they went to a certain place, what to expect out there. So the whole idea was the accessibility audit takes so long. Can we crowdsource it? So we decided to then build an app that can use smartphone features, take an image. It should then recognize whether steps exist, handrails exist, whether a ramp exists. If I have 10 similar stores, you will find that 25% of the population will then head towards stores that are more accessible. So that's an opportunity lost for you.
That was Divakar Menon, member of the board at the Association of People with Disabilities, who have been working to help influence government policies, infrastructure, and build support structure for the disabled. In this episode of the OoruLabs podcast, I talked to him about the state of our cities for the disabled and why each one of us should care and how. I am your host, Sathya Sankaran. Let's listen into this conversation. So, Divakar, thank you for joining me on the OoruLabs podcast.
Hey, thanks, Satya. My pleasure. And, given the phenomenal kinds of people that you have brought onto this podcast, it's an honor.
Not at all. The work you do is more honorable and worthy of being spoken about. And the reason I was very interested is that generally we don't see that many disabled people visually, right? I mean, I have seen a few, I have, but not in the kind of numbers that you told me about before when we had a chat earlier. There seems to be a significant, and this whole definition of disability, right? We seem to think that either you're born disabled or, and how many of them are by nature disabled. What is disability? Just give us a lowdown on this, because it was eye-opening when I spoke to you, and I think the audience need to hear this.
Okay. So, disability, let's take the 2011 census. That was the last time disability got even counted. At that time, there were only about 5 types of disabilities that were listed, right? And at that time, the percentage was about 2.6% of the total population, right? And there's only 5 types of disabilities they had, and largely physical disabilities in nature. So over the period of time, over 2016, India started following the WHO and UN standards, and we now, in 2016, the right of people with disabilities. It recognizes 21 different types of disabilities, and these include not just visual things that you can see, in terms of people with disabilities in a physical form, but they also include people with potentially with mental challenges, with even medical challenges, right? Hemophilia, thalassemia, all of these get counted now as disability. So what we see potentially are only people, the visual aspect of the challenge. You don't know whether somebody cannot speak unless you try and approach that person, right? So, but somebody has a visual impairment because you can see the cane and you can see them, walk. But so that's the challenge, right? And then there's been no other census after that. We expect that there would be about 12% of the population, that is, 12% of the population are people with disabilities, right? Amongst these 21 different disability categories. We are not even talking now of sometimes temporary disabilities. It may happen. You may have an injury. You could be disabled at that point, and then you could recover after that, right? But at the time that you have that injury, you are disabled, and you are as your the disability impairs you in terms of being able to do your daily work itself, right? Uh, WHO estimates that there are about 15% of the population of the world population that are potentially people with disability. So there is no number that I can quote off the top of my head and say, hey, we have very accurate data. I just want to add one more thing here. This is not even including what in 2022, 10% of India's population is supposed to be now senior citizens, right? So, and if you look at it, this is expected to grow to 20 to 22% by 2050, right? Now, the old, and most of us have experienced people with old age, you would see that they are always limited in terms of what they can do, cannot do, right? It could be hearing impairment, it could be physical disabilities, it could be visual disabilities, and that impairs what they can do, right? But the end of the day is the whole idea is that people with disabilities have a right, and that's what the Act allows them to education, to employment, to dignity, and that those three are probably the most important factors that we want to you want to highlight out here, because uh, we tend to treat them with sympathy, and that is not what they want. Okay, uh, and you need to give them the space, you need to empower them to do their things, and that's when their self-esteem grows, and that's exactly what we want to see, which is where the the state of how it is actually translated in real life will always come into play, right? So
These are very powerful statistics. So across the 21 types, you're talking about 12%. And then we also look at people who are aged who have some sort of impairment which occurs due to our natural aging. It's not just that you are born with disability.
right,
You could also acquire
quite
disabilities
this,
over time, and you may also acquire temporary impairments over time. So you could possibly, like they say, break a leg and then you don't know how to use your
okay,
facilities and you are disabled,
yeah,
but you have an end point. You know that you'll recover in a few months and you kind of live with it. But imagine people having to live with it for their entire lives. So the whole point of this is, with senior citizens going up to 22% plus approximately 12 to 15% of the population being permanently disabled and some more, we're talking more than 30-40% of the population at some point in time, right?
I, it's quite possible. I mean, I would, I would really like government data. I would really like government to publish actual data and statistics. But then that also leads to a challenge when a census, let's assume they do a census next year, and who's going to tell you, what there's no clean record, right? I mean, you as a census taker, who's probably untrained, not a medical professional, will go to a residence and you will say, yeah, somebody will say, yeah, I have a person with disability. And there's no way that you can evaluate it, right? And
Yeah.
there's no way you can gauge the level. So the government has been working towards some of these initiatives by trying to issue UDID cards. Government hopes that the UDID card will be the single most defining factor of at least counting disabilities. But that's also fraught with a lot of other challenges. I mean, only 35% of our beneficiaries at APD actually have UDID cards. So that itself, I mean, the whole process is long, it's cumbersome, it's completely online, and people don't want it, and the benefits are, much lesser. So in an urban setting like Bangalore, for example, you have groups that try and get you UDID cards, but then again, you don't see that many people going out there and getting it.
For our viewers, why don't you explain what's a UDID card and what does it actually supposed to do and how did this come about?
So a UDID card is a disability identification card. It now the government is color coding it, but earlier what you did was you applied for the UDID card. You said that yes, I have some form of disability, and then you would be asked to get that disability assessed by a medical examiner, who would then classify your disabilities in terms of, because again, disability is not a zero or one. It could be a range, right? I mean, I could be dyslexic, that might be a disability. I could have severe cerebral palsy, that's a much more severe disability. Or I could be mildly, I could have growth delays, like my daughter does, for example, and she gets classified under another section, right? Uh, so the government and the medical examiner would classify that. It's a completely online process that's available on the government websites. The Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, you can go in there, you can register for it, you can select the location which is closest to you. For example, NIMHANS in Bangalore does an assessment for people with mental disabilities, right? And that's a due process that you normally follow. And now the government is color coding it, saying blue cards for 0 to 40, green for 40 to 80, and red for 80 plus, right? In terms of how severe your disability is, and what you might potentially be eligible for from the government side also, right? So that is what UDID
Mm.
typically is, right? At this point.
APD itself is enabling these kind of things. Tell us a little bit about its work over the past many decades. Uh, what is it trying to do? What is it trying to accomplish? And where do you see the challenges in APD's work itself?
Oh, challenges there are plenty. We probably need a separate podcast on that. But
We'll set the teaser and then we'll go back to the next one.
yeah, but APD is a 65-year-old NGO that was started by a person with physical disabilities, and she did not let her disabilities come in the way of NS Hema. She did not let her disabilities come in the way of her opening the doors for a lot more people as challenged as she was, or lesser, and or more, for example, right? Uh, it started off as an association of people with physical disabilities, but over a period of time, we've kind of taken most of the 21 disabilities into account, right? So our key focus really is on trying to identify, and one of the key things is with disabilities, especially, is that the earlier you identify it, the better it is in terms of the ability to treat them. Right. So APD works across the it's got a life cycle approach which works from trying to identify disabilities at a very early stage, which we call our early intervention programs. It works in the 0 to 3 years category. And then once a child is ready for school, we run an inclusive education school called the Shraddhanjali Institute, and integrated school. And once they're ready, come out of school, we, take them up for employment, put them through employment learning mechanisms. We also have our assistive devices unit, which develops, wheelchairs, which manufactures wheelchairs, assistive devices like prosthetics, etc. And we also do a lot of community mental health programs. So APD works largely with the communities or with partners who work into the community. And we've touched probably about 10 lakh plus beneficiaries at this point in time. And we're largely donor funded. So, we identify programs that we can run. We seek donors for those, and then part of the CSR funds to come into APD as a part of that, right? So we are about 350 very dedicated people that are some within our main office, but a lot of them situated in offices in JP Nagar. We run a nursery out there. So people who are interested, and Bangalore is a very plant friendly, location. So JP Nagar or Kelsanahalli, it's somewhere down on the NH44. You can go to those nurseries and you can actually buy, or you can call APD and they will organize something for uh, at your at your at your residence itself, or your apartment complex, or your community around that. So we touch in nearly every different way that somebody wants help. Somebody who's disabled wants help. We kind of offer a full spectrum of uh, services. Is not the very correct term, but essentially that's what we do. We serve them, right? So that might I mean, services, given my background in IT, it's kind of, has a very different connotation. I don't want people, misrepresenting that in terms of what people actually do, but they do serve people. And I think that's a better way of defining them.
We are all living in cities. You set this up in cities, and there is a huge amount of people who are in the cities. Even if you assume conservatively a quarter of the population is kind of disabled and disabled related, either age related or temporary or permanent. What are the how friendly are our cities for this quarter of the population?
APD works not only in the cities, but also in rural areas. But let's focus on the work that we do in cities. And we work across 6 states right now, and we hope to expand our presence in the others. We also do a lot of work with policy and government policy. So we'll touch on that when we're talking about how friendly are our cities, right?
Sure.
Take a typical city, right? I mean, for any individual like you and I living in a city, what does it involve? It involves you have a place where you live. You have to get out of that place. Let's call that the first mile. Go to some mode of transport that will take you to your potentially your place of work, place of entertainment, place of education, whatever, right? And then you have the last mile which you need to navigate to get to that, right? And that's where to get out. Now assume, take a step back and say, okay, now I have a physical disability for a moment, or even I could have a visual disability, right? Take the first mile itself. I want to get out and I want to get to a place where I can move around. And most of the people at least in Bangalore, may travel by cars. You may use public transport also. So getting to a car is not so much of a problem. If you know exactly where the car is parked. If you want to call a cab, a lot of the apps are not accessible. So take the case of Rapido. Okay, they just got hauled up by the Delhi High Court to say that you better make your app accessible, and based on a complaint from somebody who couldn't, get services from Rapido. And so that takes care of your mid-mile is already lost out there, right? Even if you can assume you can get out of your place, right? Your last mile, when you reach somewhere, is the other challenge, right? It's about can I approach let's say the building that I want to get in, right? And if I am wheelchair bound, I need a ramp that I can get in. If I have a physical mobility problem, I need steps. If there are steps, I need handrails that I can support myself in. If I'm visually challenged, I need tactile paths to guide me there. If I'm to park my car, I need clear signages about, where I'm going to park my car, right? And how much of this have you seen in the places that you have gone to, right? Even though the RPWD Act and even the Buildings Act, right? I think there's a National Building Code Act requires that places are accessible. The implementation is poor because people want to maximize on the land space that is there. The opportunity cost of not utilizing the opportunity cost of building a ramp versus building another shop front out there is huge, or making that front more visible or better or more beautifying that front is more appealing, that can attract more footfalls into your office or into your mall, as you say, right? Is more appealing. I mean, these are unfortunately the implementation challenges that happen, and our footpaths. It's a story best left to itself. There is a huge, even you and I, as well-abled people, may not be able to navigate all of the footpaths and effectively. Although the tender for sure contracts did come out with a fairly decent, at least in Bangalore, did come out with a fairly decent map of how the footpath should be, what spaces should be, etc. It's still, there are places where it lacks in implementation, or the finish is not great, and you will still go through bumps if you want. I mean, I take my mother is now 90 years old. She cannot walk on her own because of her knees. And if you take her out, it has to be via wheelchair. And there is always this hope that there will be a good Samaritan who will help you, rather than, giving them or giving me the ability to say, hey, it's okay, I can wheel that wheelchair, or if somebody young can wheel that wheelchair up the ramp and, do their this thing. I mean, it's a far cry from what you see in the West to that extent. Once you go inside a space, that itself has other problems, right? So when you talk about the approach, that is a problem. When you go inside the space, that is a problem also. Most office spaces have nice super marbled floors and little or no tactile parts, right? Little or no grip for people, who are possibly on crutches, or even tactile paths to guide people who are visually challenged. Uh, Lifts are sometimes small. Toilets, if you're lucky, you might find a toilet wide enough for accessible, that is accessible, because they require space for wheelchairs to maneuver in. They require sound for people who are visually challenged. They require to conform to a certain design so that people know exactly where to go. And for wheelchairs, the height of the sink, etc., all need to be at different levels, right? And unfortunately, architects, builders, designers don't design or don't bake in accessibility into the design, right? And that's when, and trying to fix it as an afterthought, you do a patchwork. And uh, we did, when Namaraste happened 3 or 4 weeks back, we did an accessibility audit of public transportation places, right? And we discovered that of the 18 bus stops across the city that we assessed, uh, uh, only two of them had ramp. Only two of them had tactile paths. Only four of them had any kind of ramps to access the bus stop, right? So now you're talking about somebody who is coming in, and less said about the buses. The buses don't have those cushions that they sink down. I think there's a term for it which I keep forgetting, but the buses kind of the steps come down, and then you can push the
They
ramp up.
kneel down, so the buses
They kneel down.
and then
Yes,
ramp,
yes.
yeah.
That's
Hydraulics that is required. Yeah.
yeah. And none of our buses are equipped with that, right? Whether it's public or private buses. Uh, so yeah, it is a difficult proposition. I don't think our cities are there yet. Although I do see initiatives like the Sugamya Bharat that is happening now across India, and the Karnataka commissioner has taken that in to a very large extent. We have, using our app, we have where we can assess basic accessibility criteria. We have about 10,000, close to 10,000 places that are now assessed across India. A large chunk of them being in Karnataka and Bangalore and in Goa, right? But this is a step to give data, right? It depends on now what, we have to slice and dice that data and give it back to the authorities, who can then, take the necessary action around that. And that I think is where the true success of, building that will come.
So we'll come to the tech solution. It's an interesting app. I've downloaded it and I tried to do it the last time, the yes to access. But before that, I want to dwell a little bit on the things that you said here. There are the buildings and there is the getting to the buildings part. The buildings themselves, like you said, some of them are marble. I walk on the tactile steps on the metro or in any of these stations, because it's so smooth that my own slippers make me feel vulnerable, because they are not. I don't know why it's so smooth, and I end up walking on the tactile strip that is there just to get a grip on the station.
Exactly.
You're literally all sliding through all these mosaic floors everywhere. And that's for an able person like me. But I also found that some of these places, the tactile strip is there, but it ends somewhere, and I can't tell if it is done right or not, because I'm not in a position to audit. Even for an abled person, it seems to be quite a big challenge to navigate these buildings.
Yeah.
But there seems to be a cost to provision access, right? Which is let's say you take out of the 21 types, maybe 15 of them need some physical changes to be made, and others might need some other kind of changes, audible, auditory, whatever, right?
Uh-huh.
So there is probably something they will pick, like what are the most frequently occurring ones for my workplace that might need to be catered to, and there's a customization of that is required. Or is there a template that the national building code says this, you just do that, and do you know if it covers most of what it is, or does it only cover a segment of physical disabilities alone? What happens to the special kind of disabilities which might be smaller in number but is still an existential thing? How do you think through the change at those, how much of cost do they need to pay, and is it something they would find, in my view it is worth, because that's a quarter of the population.
Yeah.
But is the quarter of the population spread across the 21? What should they be doing? Is that already decided? How do you look at it, building's perspective?
So I think some of the best place to start with would be to at least address physical disabilities, right?
Sure.
Those that are directly visible. Uh, and that is not to downplay any other disability. That was not the idea. But then at least that with people with physical disabilities, they can now navigate into your building. They have the necessary either approaches. They have the entrances are good. The approaches are good. Tactile paths are there. And they can navigate the building with ease, right? Or whatever complex with ease. Uh, the next step would be to then start looking at the next level of disabilities in terms of and at least solve for people who are out there in the public space a lot more, right? People, let's say, with hearing impairment, make lifts, lifts. You get into a lift. I have never heard a lift. I mean, you have to always look up and see whether, you know which floor you're on or not, right? I mean, a simple mic that will tell you you're on the fifth floor, sixth floor, would help, right? Uh, Something that is braille on all the lift buttons. They're not difficult ones to fix, right? I mean, it's easy. Uh, why should and I think sometimes I think the challenge is also for people with disabilities to come forward and ask and demand for their rights, right? Doesn't always happen. It's not something that is easy, because people expect that things will happen. Good Samaritans will be there, uh, and they kind of get into that mode. In fact, APD did an experiment with people. We'd organized loans and given it to people so that they could work with as delivery people with Swiggy, Zomato, etc. Right, and uh, at the during that time there was we went back. There was a session that we ran with them, and they said we constantly have challenges. We have challenges at the restaurant. We're not able to get off like other delivery persons could. They could go up to the counter, pick up things, etc. But this had to be there was no access, right, from the footpath. How do I go there when they're going from place A to place B? And you would have seen Zomato riders, which is a great thing that Zomato is doing it actually. But imagine them navigating Bangalore roads, right? Bumps, sudden potholes, unexpected this thing, less patience, navigation by navigating through the mess of cars. It is always a challenge. So, but they thought that this is something authorities will fix. Didn't stand out there and say, hey, you know what? I think we need to ask for this, and that is something that I think needs to come from there. We need to probably educate them in terms of you know what their rights are. We need to get them to demand for those rights, and once people start demanding, I think things will fall into place. It's like workplace inclusion, right? I mean,
Mm.
once we've had in APD itself, we had somebody with visual impairment join the Yes to Access group, that the app that we were talking about, and it required a learning on our part also to make sure that she could be included into that team very easily, right? It required us to change. It required us to be cognizant of certain aspects or facets, and it required us to be more empathetic to that. And I don't mean sympathy, I mean empathetic, at least to the fact that, this is what is there in front of us. And people don't get that because I think, and that goes back to, inclusive schools. We don't have them. Children are not exposed to other people with disabilities. So unless there is somebody in the family, you have little or no idea what disabilities are, right? In your growing up years itself. So you have little or no empathy, or you don't get to interact with people of that sort at all in all your growing years. And that itself creates a mindset issue. So I think it's our mindset, right, that we need to change to demand, if they don't demand it, for them to demand. And that's where APD is trying to play is trying to help with inclusion, with changings in policy, with creating integrated schools rather than segregated schools, right? I mean, that's the key difference.
I want to come to the schools part, but let's jump into the tech, because I remember the Namaste sign language interpreter you provided for all of the panel discussions.
Yeah.
That's the first time I have had a sign language interpreter. I was on the panel and I was talking and I was constantly looking to see what she was saying and I wouldn't understand. But it was interesting that there were people there who were looking at her and understanding. It's simple things like this that I think we need to be able to include. If this would be a call out to people who watch and they are organizing things, they are organizing events, it's probably worth engaging and paying for a sign language interpreter to be a part of your events.
Yeah.
And that's livelihoods. That's people who can also engage more audiences into the mainstream ecosystem, right? We are looking to, at the end of this, what we are trying to do is include the quarter of the population into the mainstream, and that's a sizable,
Right.
not just from a rights sense but also from an economic sense. You and I were talking about this, right? The older buildings, the newer buildings, for example, larger buildings which have the money and appetite would probably include some of the building codes and at least the physical ones, if not everything else. Look at the roadside shop, the other economic pyramid, where it's just like a stack of two small boxes. And we talked about some of the showrooms which will have a step, and I don't think the retrofit is even going to work in these kind of places, right?
Well, in some of them it is impossible, right? I mean, if you go to Indiranagar, if you go to Koramangala, and if you look at as you said, shops stacked up side by side, or a makeshift mall, you will find that very difficult to retrofit. Okay, and let's face it. I mean, I don't think we will have 100% of the places that will be accessible, but and even when we talk about accessibility, it is not that all your entrances have to have ramps. There has to be a one entrance that is not too difficult to access, that and is kept clean. I mean, I've seen ramps with flower pots on them. I mean, it defeats the whole purpose of creating the ramp. Everything looks beautiful, but then somebody with a wheelchair will not be able to go up that, right? But at least there have to be defined access points, and which is not, it's sometimes I think, right, the accessibility function on your phone is buried deep in your settings. It's and somebody, as an able person trying to turn on accessibility features itself, you find it difficult. Forget about somebody who already has challenges, right? I mean, I always think that sometimes phones and devices and gadgets have to be built with accessibility as the default, and then you start turning off features if you're able, because you are more able to do that, right? And that's my personal view. And when I attended the digital accessibility conference, I just, it just struck me that there's so many people talking about accessibility features, but these are the kind of challenges that kind of exist, right? So I think it's being able to design for accessibility, and unless you design that upfront, makeshift will always be a thing. I mean, you can get a lift later which has, or you can put a speaker into a lift. That is the simpler part. But building a ramp in some of these places, more or less impossible. But if I have 10 similar stores, you will find that 25% of the population will then head towards stores that are more accessible. So that's an opportunity lost for you, right? So if you may as well move out of that uh, uh, shop if 25% of your potential shopping population is going elsewhere to move, right? And that whole trend that you see of shops to malls, uh, whether good or bad, let's not get into that. But then that's because a lot of people, there are a lot more footfalls in malls rather than, down Brigade Road, for example.
Yeah.
You know,
And that leads me to your tech platform, Yes to Access. What does it do? Why did you decide to build it?
about 2.5, 3 years back, APD ran a survey where, and this whole problem about why don't we see people with disabilities outside, right, in the real world. And one of the key things was that people did not know if they went to a certain place, what to expect out there, right? Uh, so they know the first mile, that is okay. They can possibly navigate the second mile, which is, we'll come to that as a part of our solution. And there's I reach a mall, I reach a theater, I reach a shopping area. Can I get in there and can I shop, right? So APD thought about three aspects. One, the built spaces. The second, the mobility, which is transport. And third is digital accessibility, right? So APD has always been thinking how to make these three work. So the Yes to Access actually addresses the first part, the built spaces part, where we decided that, you can do uh, an accessibility audit, let's say of the airport or of a mall. But, it'll just be 5 days spent. It'll be a huge report and it'll get buried in some builder's, shelf with some things being acted on, right? But so the whole idea was the accessibility audit takes so long. Can we crowdsource it? Can we use features that are now available on phone cameras, on smartphones, for example, and then be able to use that data from there to identify things that are really important. Okay, so things like entrances, things like approaches, things like signage, toilets and washrooms and availability of those, right? Uh, and parking spaces, etc., availability of wheelchairs in that place. So we decided to then build an app that can use smartphone features, and that is, not very. Not I'm not talking about the iPhone 16, 14, etc., but maybe even simple smartphones, right? And take an image. It should then recognize whether steps exist, handrails exist, whether a ramp exists. Then you place your smartphone on it. It'll tell you whether the ramp is at the right angle. I mean, it shouldn't be vertical like this, but it should be something that they can navigate themselves, or it can be gently pushed up, right? Tactile parts, whether they exist or not within, are the slow floors too slippery? Are they made of the right material so that people with crutches can navigate them easily? So we built things that you and I can take. We can download the app on the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store. You can go to any place that you are in. You can start an audit and you can upload your images, and the app will assess the level of accessibility of that place and then provides that information in a map that anybody can consume, right? We hope to we are making this a digital public good, in the sense that anybody with any app. So tomorrow, you, let's say, are a theater owner, who, or Book My Show, who wants to sell movie tickets. You could consume data of all the theaters within that app and then indicate the level of accessibility that those theaters have, right? You could be a Zomato that could be looking at restaurants and then indicate the level of accessibility that a restaurant has, right? It has a ramp, it has an approach, it has toilets, it has whatever, right? To that extent. And this information is also and take the other way. Government can use it to figure out in public spaces, right? In government offices, how accessible are they? And then they can start fixing those kind of things. So we haven't got to the fixing part. We're in the process of collecting data. We've got about 10,000 places assessed so far. The Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment in India has thrown their weight behind this app, and they've taken the data. They've actually taken the app and audited a lot of public spaces in different cities. It's a nationwide rollout, and Bangalore, Karnataka are also part of that rollout, right? So they want to make all the physical places at least an accessibility indicator needs to be there on those spaces, and that's essentially what the app helps you achieve in a that anybody, that is you, I, any lay person could actually be a contributor to an accessibility audit. I mean, you contribute to Google Maps and
Right.
places, you upload your photos there. Click photos on accessibility.
Yeah,
That's all I ask.
that's amazing. 10,000 places and growing. And I think it's a beautiful way of getting people involved in caring about this and getting the empathy built rather than just having sympathy.
Yeah.
And it is possible that I've been trying to click. It's been a while. I logged on, I signed up, and I started this thing. And then I got on this call, and I need to get back to auditing a lot for you guys.
Yeah.
Uh, Schools are very interesting. We know that the lower end of the shops and others are going to have a challenge, but they might want to try and see how they can make it better for themselves.
Mhm.
Uh, there's a lot of grade A properties which are already trying to be disabled friendly. Maybe they can make it better and continue to do. But it starts with, for the people who are born with disabilities,
Mhm.
schools are the first place where they need to start becoming a productive member of the society.
Yeah.
And I don't know, is it a burden for the current schools? Are they not capable? I don't know if the teachers are already overburdened with this syllabus for the able. How do you see the challenges of current schools being able to cater to the not so able?
It's a huge challenge. It's very so. As per the Right to Education Act, everybody, irrespective of whether they have disabilities or not, uh, have the right to education. Right? Uh, Schools are supposed to honor that, and which means that they have to create inclusive spaces. That means and now that national open school curriculums are there, you don't need to have a child going through standard 1 to 10. You can have an open school curriculum that takes a child from 1 to whatever number of subjects that they want, right? Which are great things as far as schools are concerned, but you don't see that inclusivity happening in schools, right? uh, Multiple reasons. Sometimes schools are not equipped with the right facilities, like we talked about in the accessibility audit, uh, or with respect to the app. Second, there aren't enough trained personnel that they can hire, right? I mean, imagine I can have a teacher for 40 kids in a classroom. I need probably one special educator for 2 kids, 3 kids, right? The cost is there, right? To that. Uh, so schools have tended to be either focusing on children with special needs. They're inclusive to some of the children with, a mild disability, so to speak, right? Uh, but not to all of them. So if you're dyslexic, they will probably employ, you have separate hours that you can spend with somebody, and that's a level of disability. While I don't want to undermine it, it is a level of disability that is a challenge, but it is easier for schools to manage that level of disability. But there are other cases where a little more severe development delays, like my daughter went through, there are no integrated schools that can help with identifying, doing things that are not entirely curriculum oriented, but more work oriented. So hence there is this huge bifurcation that you will see, which is special needs schools and education institutions versus inclusive schools. And it's a loss to both sides of the fence, because the abled children do not understand or do not start to empathize with another part of their peers and world that are lesser abled. The lesser able do not, integrate well with the others, right? So I have seen that being a challenge at home too. So, if there was more integration, more inclusion, maybe some behavior patterns would have changed, right? You learn from your peers at the end of the day,
Yeah.
right? And that unfortunately is not happening in the inclusive education space to the extent that it should be. A few schools do try, but I know that they have very less teachers
Mm.
that are oriented towards special education and special needs children. Uh, it's it's a societal issue. Okay, I think that's also the problem, because I have not experienced it, but I have heard of people saying, but why should that person hold up the rest of the class, right? Uh, it's a dog eat dog world as far as education is concerned, and that's the way our education system has unfortunately been tailored to. And these kind of you want to stay ahead in the race always, right? And then you don't want anybody holding anybody back, and
Yes, possible.
that's
Does that
yeah.
indicate towards then saying probably special needs schools are better, and mainstream might not be able, but then that won't scale also, right?
It will scale in the sense that it will scale to address it, but that does not address the problem of of uh, so it's this way, right? Over a period of time, I've come to realize degrees mean nothing, certificates mean nothing. Okay, especially with my child, the basic ability to function on a daily basis is probably what is most important, right? Uh, can she get up in the morning? Can she brush her teeth? Can she get ready for her day? Uh, those become the single most important things in life. It is not whether she can read, whether she can write, or whether she can quote, a Shakespearean text, if that's what the world wants, right? So there is a different set of challenges that we need to address. But my whole point is that it should be within the confines of a school, right? It should teach people, give people visibility to both aspects of life. So every school, in my mind, should, if they want to create separate classrooms, and that's what typically happens in all this, that's fine. They can have workroom, but it should be a part of the school. It cannot be, something that is kept in isolation under the covers, under wraps elsewhere and done. I mean, I wish every school had yes, I have a section that deals with, I have workrooms that deal with, children who are less able. Yes, that should be the way it should be.
Yeah, and it's probably a nicer way to mainstream quarter of our population into this also, right? 10%, 12%, whatever it is, right? They from very early age, the
Yeah,
kids also
they
start looking at them as their
absolutely,
own, right?
absolutely, absolutely.
I think that's a more
I,
important value.
yeah, and that's why APD has always been, so we run an integrated school, and we work towards creating an inclusive education ecosystem across multiple schools, including government schools. So in
Hmm.
fact, government schools are far better able to handle a lot of these. Actually, then it's also uh, the problem comes when it becomes a social stigma and people don't want to send their kids there, because then you have the other challenges. Child cannot access. There are not enough buses. There are not enough means to transport, etc. Right? All those become issues that are there at a different level and a different category of people.
Right. That brings, yeah. So the whole thing about bus and travel, the school buses are not disabled friendly. That brings me to this whole the future and how you look at it, right? Our cities are built for even the able to become disabled. That's how bad our infrastructure is that you may lose a limb just by going out there and trying to do something.
Right,
And
right.
now we are trying to pull the handbrakes and get the city to be friendly for the disabled. It's like starting from minus 20 for them. The where do you see this going? There are so many pieces. One is the tech platform, auditing, making sure that the private spaces are becoming better. Then the schools are trying to include the young into the mainstream so that we get used to that. And then there are this whole public space that is an important. I know you said that the Ministry of Social Justice is interested, and the city governments are trying to make their best. And I do notice in some of the kinds of newer age footpaths that are coming up, and sidewalks, and some of the buses, at least the
Yeah.
Volvo buses, electric buses that they use are there. If you had to just like qualitatively rate these facilities, of course rural areas have a larger issue. I
So
didn't even go there, and we talked about it on the
that's true.
phone. Maybe that's I mean, that's a whole Pandora's box. I don't know if we should open it now, but considering we are an urban affairs podcast and we take the cities, like you said, somewhere or the other somebody will help you with sympathy,
Yeah,
if not the empathy. But
that's true.
where do you see the future?
I think first thing is to create awareness, right? Big time. That's one of the things that we want to do as a part of this whole app, the Yes to Access, is uh, be a champion, create awareness, build information that others who are lesser able can use, right? So that is one of the key things out there. Second, the first mile to last mile mobility. I think if we get our bus stops, better in better shape, if we get our metros are reasonably okay, our railway stations to some extent, but you can't get onto a train, for example. Maybe that's a challenge we will solve. But at least if we can solve for 80 to 90% of the problems, then I think we're taking those baby steps towards making. I don't expect that the world will change overnight. Bangalore, I mean, as our it's been stated that even God cannot solve Bangalore's problems. So I expect that the city people the city people will be a lot more enthusiastic about at least making information available to people who are lesser able. So that's one aspect of it. Second, give a shout out to places that have great facilities and places that don't have great facilities, right? We all know that, yeah, it problems exist, but if article, I think I saw an article recently, 16 best disabled friendly restaurants. Okay,
Hmm.
somewhere, yeah, there was an article and there were this thing, but limited amount of disability, this thing, but that was what but at least it was there, right? So these kind of articles will help. First mile, last mile, challenges. If you the thing that we want to do with our app is actually give a shout out, work closely with the builder community. So their buildings in office space in Bangalore is largely controlled by a very few set of builders, right? And if we can work with them, nothing like it in terms of making sure that we use the Yes to Access app. We can assess, they can fix to the extent that it's possible. Uh, I think, like I said, empathy is what we need to show to people rather than sympathy. And the next time you meet somebody, do not lower their self-esteem by saying, I volunteer to lift you up those steps, right? At least do that, but after giving the building people a good shouting about the lack of ramps. The Yes to Access app, I just want to close on that because it's a great and powerful data tool that anybody can consume, right? The data we hope will be consumed by a variety of providers. The data we hope will be, and the insights from it will be something that the government can use in terms of quickly assessing, all the, hopefully there will be a drive to quickly assess all the bus stops in Bangalore. We did a sample of about 20. BMTC may come back and say, let's assess all 20 of them, right? And then work with the BBMP or whichever is the body now that looks after Greater Bangalore to fix them, right? And hopefully then things will start moving in that right direction. I think the data is there, will start getting there. The insights are what we really need to act on to this thing. And anybody who wants to come and volunteer, it's a very simple thing. You just need to download the app and get going. Any place you're going to, if it's for lunch, if it's for chai, if it's for or coffee, as we drink in Bangalore, or if it's for a movie, if it's to your office, then take some photos. Let's make that information available to people who really want to use them, right? So this information is available on a map, and people can select that I'd rather go to restaurant A versus restaurant B. That's also there as a part of the feature of the app. So you're making or enabling that. So next time, instead of Google Photos or Google Maps, please use the app to upload relevant information that can serve somebody.
Awesome. This is on that note. I have the app, and I'll put a link to that. And I'm trying to do my bit to, and it's interesting. It has latest updates. You got the audit, you got map, you got learning videos. There's a lot of stuff in there. Instead of doing an Instagram next time, like Divakar says, you guys should just do an access audit at least once in a while, and then you can go back the second time for the Instagram photo. On that note, Divakar, thanks a bunch for coming on this show and talking to me about all of these things. I hope we get more action on this, more awareness on this, like you said, and let's see how this goes. Thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Thanks, Sathya. It was a pleasure. Really good to have this very interactive discussion. And I think, and hopefully we'll see a lot of traction coming through from this. And thanks again for having me. And I mean, technically APD, I'm just a representative of that.
True, and for the disabled as well. And great respect for what you and the types of you do. And I really appreciate that. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you.